My parents came over from Ireland. Actually, my mother from Ireland, my grandfather on my father's side. My mother lived in Hyde Park, and she was a Bridget. A lady in the house that she worked in died and left my mother the house, but her two sisters protested the will, and because we were Irish, and Irish need not apply at the time, she didn't get the house, so my parents moved out here. We lived on Route 1, right down the hill from the State Police Barracks.
And I don't go all the way back, but there's rumors that the 1700s, the Whiting family are related. My father's name was Charles Whiting Rice, a Whiting family that was in Franklin and this and that. So I guess the family goes back quite a ways to the town of Wrentham. I grew up on Franklin Street, right across from Lake Archer. Today, it's like 6 houses down from Nicky's restaurant. In the old days, it was Burns's farm stand. But that dates it way, way back. So, you know, I grew up in Wrentham. I was born in 47, lived in Wrentham till I was 24, 25. I do reside in Plainville, no disclaimers here. I do reside in Plainville, but virtually every day of my life I've been in Wrentham because I've worked in Wrentham for a bunch of different capacities.
My family came from Iowa, my mother and father, and my father's job brought him to the East Coast during World War II. And my parents were actually out to dinner at the Weber Duck Inn. And it was a bunch of businessmen. We're having conferences on what are we going to do because World War II was starting and we all have to figure out what we're doing. And the women at the next table started talking to my mother, and she said the place next to us is for sale on Everett Street. And my father perked up his ears, and because they were looking for a farm type place in the country. And story has it at 2 o'clock in the morning, a bunch of guys left the inn and they were tramping through the woods around our farm in Wrentham that we eventually bought. And we're still there. But that would have been 1941, late 41 or very early 42. And they moved here in about 44.
We moved in 1983. We built our house in 83. I bought 4.8 acres of land on Chestnut Street in 1972 for $7,200. So
I moved into Plainville in 1978. I'm not a land baron like Al. I got about a half acre, and we paid $27,000.
I took a piece of my mother's farm property and built a house in 1978 for $35,000. And I still live in it today, and I'm a part owner of the farm nowadays. My parents are both gone. So that's my story. Paid the house off. Now my taxes are higher than my mortgage used to be.
Absolutely.
And I don't think it's even close.
I can't even remember the year, but Vogel School, and then to the Central School, and we were the first class to go to King Philip, to go 4 years to King Philip Regional High School.
I also attended the Vogel School. I think Al was a classmate of George Vogel, the school's named after. But I went 5th and 6th grade. You went to the center school because the schools were overcrowded. The Vogel, the Delaney School was just starting to come into existence. So you went to the center school and you walked down for lunch down to the Delaney School and back. And then I went to King Philip Regional High School back when the 7th and 8th grade went to the same school with all the kids. It was 7 to 12, and I graduated from King Philip in 1965.
I'm right behind him in years, but I attended the Vogel School. I was in the first class of the new elementary school, which I think is the Delaney School now, yep. But they didn't even have a name for it back then. Right. And I spent a half a year in the center school for the same reason, the overcrowding. Mm-hmm. And then I moved to the new wing of the new elementary school for the rest of my 6th grade class. I had Mrs. Brown. A lot of people in Wrentham had Mrs. Brown.
I had Mrs. Brown.
You had her? Okay.
Yeah.
And then I attended King Philip all the way through 7 years. In fact, Bill, I think you were in my mechanical drawing class.
I can't draw a straight line with a ruler.
Well, yeah, okay. No, you had Mr. Sumner when you were like a senior or something, yeah. And I was a little kid in that class, maybe about 8th grade or 9th grade or something. So I remember him. He was a big guy even back then.
My fifth grade class, I had a gentleman by the name of Lodi. Rusty Lodi was his name. Great teacher, excellent teacher. And there was a Miss McDermott, who was a fourth grade teacher, who was absolutely beautiful, and every kid in the elementary school was in love with her.
So there were a few, and probably that's the reason I ended up going into education and being a teacher originally. Mrs. Brown was a great teacher in the fifth grade. I remember Mrs. White in the second grade. There's a local character around town named Phil Tagaman, and Phil and I used to end up being disciplined by having to sit under Mrs. White's desk as she would be out teaching the class. And I can't believe that would happen to us, but anyway. When I got to the high school, Miss Mantico was a history teacher. There were a few history teachers I liked, Jack Dwyer, Frank Gallipo, and I originally became a history teacher. The thing with Frank Gallipo, when you talk about different time and different places, and Frank was a former Marine and a great sense of humor. But if you spoke out when you weren't supposed to speak into, he turned his ring around and he just bopped you right off the head. So I still have a few knots up there, I admit to that, but those are some of the teachers.
He had played football at BU,
Yes, he did.
And he would come around and give us all a little slap on the back of the head with his ring. And
Time to wake up, boys.
Yep. He was a great teacher. And we also had a coach by the name of Rick Sargent, who was absolutely great. He made everybody have fun in school and love the game.
Who'd you like, Greg?
I had all of those teachers, every one of them. I liked Miss Mantica. I liked Mr. Dwyer. Mr. Gallipo, I remember him. I met one of his daughters at a party one time. And she said her name is Candy Gallipo, and I said, oh my God, I know who you are. Yes, only one of those people there.
Actually, my daughter is a history teacher at North Attleboro High School, and she teaches with Frank Gallipo's grandson.
Oh, isn't that interesting? Anyway, he was a great guy.
Oh, yeah.
I especially, however, liked in English department Mr. Hood at King Philip. I especially liked, you know Bob
I
Hood.
just had breakfast with him 2 weeks ago.
Yep, and I told him he came to our 50th reunion, and I
Yep.
said, Mr. Hood, you were a good teacher. I remembered you above
Yep.
most everybody else.
Very good teacher.
Yep, we had Mr. Sumner together at Mechanical Drawing.
Yep.
Bill and I did. And full disclosure, my mother was a teacher at King Philip.
Yes, she was.
She started out at Wrentham High School. She was a cooking teacher at the home ec department. Started out at Wrentham High, and she couldn't transfer over to King Philip because somebody else was already in line to take the cooking teacher job. So she went to Stoughton High and went through that. And then when the job opened up at King Philip, she took it. And oddly enough, at Stoughton High in high school, she had Dick Gillespie and Bob Cassavant. Those guys came from Stoughton.
And you know who else was a classmate of them, was a good friend of Al's and mine, was the former baseball coach at King Philip, who's in the Mass Baseball Coaches Hall of Fame, Gary Lombard.
They
were all classmates.
I did not know that.
They were all classmates at Stoughton High
I
School.
learned something today, brand new.
I get a lot of important knowledge.
Funny you would bring up this word Tagaman, and now we're talking about bars in Wrentham, Bill.
There was a place in the center of Wrentham on Kendrick Street called the Stein when we were in high school. And this kid, Phil Tagaman, that Bill talks about, tended bar there while I was in school. And he would go up to the corner shop in the center of town, leave his books, walk down the hill and tend bar, and we'd come in and have beers.
And there's a number of places, down at with James Cafe is a Roadhouse Cafe. The breakfast place was originally the Floral Steakhouse. It was run by the Sanchioni family, and then when the mother and father got out of the business, one of their sons turned it into a rock and roll joint. It was Dixie's. It was quite a place.
Yep.
On the corner of Beach and South was a place that the old timers remember, Bishop's Tavern. I just barely remember it. But then in the late 60s, it was the Green Garter. It was a banjo sing-along, throw peanuts at people place that later became a rock and roll bar called the El Bolero Lounge. Yes. But my favorite all-time place in Wrentham, which is no longer in existence, was the Villa Capri. Oh, yeah. The Villa Capri was down on the Plainville line on 1A. It's now a pet resort, a luxe pet resort. We used to call it 18 to 80, and age was if you were 20, 21, you were hanging around and socializing with people that were 40, 45, 50. Annie was a cook. She was an Italian lady. She took care of you. It was nothing. They had They had Slim, the piano player that was missing a finger,
Friday and Saturday
or,
night.
or Big Linda on the guitar, and everything was sing-along, and both of them ended the night. And if you were there, and Smitty and I might have been there at closing a couple of times, everybody had to get up and sing God Bless America.
Well, actually, I attended bar there
you
when
did.
I was in school.
I'm way too young to remember this stuff. Way too young.
Those are only
But I-
some of the stories.
Yes.
But I knew Annie from
Oh, Annie was
I
the
knew
best.
Annie from the Mirror Club actually.
Yeah.
She was there later. I'm an ex-Wrentham State School employee, the developmental center over there. So our hangouts were the Shamrock Club and the Mirror Club, which were right across the campus on Shear Street. And like any given time, day or night, you would find state school employees over there, either before work, or after work, or never during work. Never that.
Club licenses.
But anyway, the Shamrock Club especially was the town hangout back then.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, all the bikers showed up there and all the party guys, and I remember Al Kempton was flying a kite in the state school field, and he walked in the Shamrock Club holding the kite string, and he had like 500 feet of string. The string went underneath the power lines. He went right in the door, into the bar, and he's sitting at the bar drinking a beer and flying a kite. Al, remember Al Kempton?
Oh, I sure do.
Oh yeah, you sure.
Sure do.
His sister was a classmate of mine.
Yep.
And another classmate of mine is your wife's sister.
That's a true
Yeah,
story. That's true.
The Evans girls from Plainville.
One of the
Nice
old-
girls, both of them. Very nice girls.
One of the old war stories, Bill will remember this, on Fridays at the Mirror Club, if you got there by 11 o'clock at night, you could catch the Friday night fight. There'd be a fight at the bar. We used to come in and just wait for the fight to start. And it'd be,
It was a different
Yeah.
place.
Yeah, and the same people would be sitting at the same bar stools
exactly.
week after week after week. And funny story, the last time I walked in there was maybe 1985 or 1990 or something like that. Nothing to do, I'm driving by, I said, hey, I'll walk in the Mirror Club. I walk in, I hadn't been in there in 10 or 12 years. The same people were sitting at the same stools in the bar.
It's hard to break old
I
habits.
turned around and walked right out. It's like, I don't need this to have the same conversations all over again with the same people. The last time I was in there, it was highly entertaining.
Well, during the Vietnam War, not one woman in Wrentham got attacked because I didn't go, and I protected every single girl in Wrentham from the Viet Cong. My brother, on the same, went over and was wounded twice, so it was very mixed emotions about that war.
Yeah, the Vietnam War was, the protests of that type of movements in Wrentham was not really forceful out there. I think Wrentham still was, the VFW was very active. The American Legion people were the veterans were still supportive. Unfortunately, we lost a couple of people that were friends of mine. Bob Topham was killed in Vietnam. His dad was a longtime director of maintenance at the middle school. And then Eric Hatch was a real good friend of mine, and he stepped on a mine and his leg was shattered and destroyed. And he actually died 2 years later as a result of that, but he came home and he would volunteer. Back when I was running a swim program at Sweat Beach, he volunteered to teach swimming lessons every day. And he wore jeans because his leg was, but he had a brand new green Corvette, and every girl in town wanted to date him. Yep. And unfortunately, he passed away as a result of Vietnam,
I remember him well. Full disclosure, my wife is first cousin with Bobby Topham, and I remember him. I remember him well in high school.
Yep.
He was a nice guy.
Real nice kid.
And you're right. I graduated in '69. That there weren't really any protesting things or anything going on in Wrentham Center. I went to Ohio for my next year. That's a different story.
Kent State?
50 miles from Kent State, I was.
Yeah.
Ohio blew up anyway. But what we had was very interesting. That summer after that, and for I think 2 summers, you would actually have kind of like concerts on the Common on Friday and Saturday nights. you'd get like 50 or 100 people just sitting on the common, and a couple of people were playing guitars, and Jim Killian was watching us and taping us from upstairs over Davis's store in the upstairs window.
Jim was a policeman back then.
Everybody knew it.
Good guy.
Nobody did anything that shouldn't be seen. And but we did that for a couple of years. I specifically remember Tommy Frawley and his guitar.
Tommy Frawley.
Yeah.
You don't know about Tommy?
Yeah, I know all about Phil Tagman wasn't there. He was other places.
John Falgren, definitely one of the best athletes to come out of Wrentham. He went on to play football in Maine. Bill Rice, a great athlete. My brother Bruce was a great athlete. They were just tremendous Wrentham athletes.
Yeah, and it's funny that Al mentions John Falgren. When people ask me, and I'm fortunate, I guess, that I've been around since the school opened. So I've seen every great athlete that played at King Philip. I mean, I went to the first King Philip Franklin game. I played in the second one. So John Falgren, to me, is one of the finest all-around athletes to ever play. He played football, basketball, he played hockey a year, he tracked. I think as a sophomore, he was the state champion in the half mile. A very good football player at UMaine. They played in the Tangerine Bowl in '65. But then, you want to talk about other, great athletes from Wrentham. I mean, I just remember the tail end of Wrentham High School, but like Bill Binney and Colin McLeod, the guys mentioned in the Sports Illustrated accent, Barry Farrer, Ronnie Shepardson, Jimmy Bowers. These are Wrentham High School names, okay? But then in King Philip, we got to talk about my boss, Jeff Plimpton went on to pitch for the Boston Red Sox, went to UMaine. Joe Johnson, who I also had the opportunity to be an assistant coach with, pitched in the major leagues for the Braves and the Blue Jays. It's real exciting to be able to see both of those guys pitch in Fenway Park. Lofa Tatupu went for King Philip, went to UMaine for 1 year, then he transferred to Southern Cal, played on 2 national championship teams, played in the Super Bowl, made All-Pro a few years. Jake Lehman, just did 6 or 7 years in the NBA, went to the University of Maryland. Garth Snow didn't go to King Philip, but Garth went to Mount St. Charles, where he won, I think, 4 straight years of hockey championships. He goes to the University of Maine. He wins the national championship as the goalie. His teammate, not too happy with him in Boston right now, Jim Montgomery, the coach of the Boston Bruins. Garth was the Olympic goalie. So back in the Olympics, I think it was 1994, Eagle Brook was on national television almost every day of the week.
I saw that.
Because that was the local spot supporting Garth Snow. And then Garth that played like 12 years in the National Hockey League, ended up being the general manager of the New York Islanders. And there's a ton of other athletes, in today's day and age. I mean, there were some wonderful female athletes over the year. Patty Cronin Armour, I think, was all-state in 3 sports. This girl, Cara O'Neill, a married named Spafford now, scored like 1,700 points in basketball. There were some state champion gymnasts. So there's been a wealth of real good athletes.
I had the pleasure of going to some girls' basketball games, and I saw Cara and Patty playing together. And holy cow, what a machine! What a machine those two were.
My oldest daughter Rachel was a senior when Cara was a freshman, and they played together. So, but yeah, I mean, so we can't forget that. Just and just because you didn't make it to the pros, there's a bunch of other really good athletes. How about their football program?
Sure.
Five, six, Super Bowls. I mean, at King Philip, not to sway away totally from athletics, King Philip has amazing athletic program, music program, drama program, DECA program. There's a wealth of great programs. I'm obviously prejudiced and biased because I worked for them for 35 years, but it holds. I've been gone a long time now. They don't even know who I am, which is fine. But tremendous kids involved in all kinds of activities.
Al Gibbons was one of my very good friends. He was the elementary school principal. He did just a great job. The Wrentham Elementary School was so well No, and well respected as an elementary school throughout the state. I taught for 37 years, and everywhere you go, you'd always hear about Wrentham Elementary School.
Al was one of a kind. He's hard to describe. Al did it his way, and he did a great job doing it his way.
Yes, he did.
He had the school, everybody loved him, the kids loved him, the teachers loved him. He loved his friends. He loved to socialize. There was the article written about him, and I was quoted as participating in some of his Patriots Day trips to the Marathon and the Red Sox. We'll leave some of those stories out. Al and I were season ticket holders together at Boston College for quite a while, but the education that he was in charge of was unbelievable coming out of the Wrentham Public Schools. Just a wonderful guy.
I think I'd have to say follow your heart. Any kid coming out of school right now, do what you feel is best for you. But Wrentham is the greatest little town in the whole world as far as I'm concerned. I've lived 80 years now and 74 of them here. And just tremendous. What a future the town still has, I think.
I couldn't agree with you more, Al. Wrentham developed in a different fashion than all of the other towns around here, for reasons that didn't really happen on purpose. They happened by accident, like zoning, kept 1 acre zoning. So we didn't have any houses every quarter of an acre like we do in some surrounding towns. The railroad came late, so there wasn't all that mill development in Wrentham. So we didn't have any of that. And there's a lot of wetlands in Wrentham. The Conservation Commission owns a lot of it today, but there's a lot of wetlands that keeps the town kind of divided. And you got neighborhoods here and there with rivers and streams and swamps around it. And
Wrentham's just, it's a unique community.
It is.
I get some of the biggest thrills, shall we say, when I go by and there's a concert on the Common on a Sunday night. And I guess some people will tell you I was the founder of that program. That was one of my goals when I first became the rec director, was that we would have a concert every Sunday night on the Common, because it reaches every age in town. And back in those days, I reached out to the developmental center, and we invited their clients. We'd have 50 or 75 clients from the state school. So you see something like that, you see Wrentham Day, you see what goes on here, and the community is just really, really, really unique. And there's still, the downtown has become vibrant again. I mean, it's funny, you go back when Al and I and Greg grew up, downtown there were actually 4 or 3 markets downtown. Actually 4. I just remember Blaisdell's as a market before it turned into a liquor store. And then there was the IGA, the AMP, and Miller's Market. And then you also had 4 lunch counters in town. I mean, the biggest deal when I was in the 6th grade was when school got out, we're probably going to go to Davis's and get a sundae or a cheeseburger or something. The corner shop was for the tough guys. You kind of stayed, that's where the Looking Glass is today. You kind of stayed out of the corner shop. Cooney's, which was where Cumberland Farms is today in the House of Pizza, that had a soda fountain. Then the regional pharmacy had a soda fountain and lunch counter. Al's mom ran the lunch counter for quite a while in there. So you had 4 plates, but people sometimes when I bring that up, they go, why? Well, there was big industry that needed a place to go to lunch. So when Crosby's came out for lunch, most of them went to the lunch counters. Okay, you also had Wrentham Steel, and way back you had Winter Brothers, and they would come out. Some went to the Stein for 3 drafts and a pickled egg for lunch, and some went to Blaisdell's to buy a little whatever. But the downtown would be flooded with people at lunchtime.
That's right. But people from the Foxborough Company used to come over and have lunch over there. And those.
Do you remember at the steam release from Crosby Actions?
Every day.
Testing valves.
Testing the
You
valves.
would hear it all over town, a big steam release.
Yeah.
And they're testing another one.
I mean, you had the way the town was, whenever there was a fire alarm rang, and there was a set of numbers. And every house in town, I swear, you had the chart on your refrigerator, and you could go up, fire down on Thurston Street. And the best thing was it was all volunteer firemen.
Still got mine.
Guys would leave their jobs and come flying through town. They all had their lights and all that stuff.
Oh,
they came flying. You knew to just step aside. Step aside. You know, for kids growing up, Sweat Park out in front. It's not the way it used to be like a high wall you could sit on, and that was a place you met, because in those days not a lot of kids had cars, and everybody hitchhiked. You hitchhiked. We go to the North Hop, which is a record hop in North Attleboro, you hitchhiked. I hitchhiked to UMass I don't know how many times. But with the kids at that time, Sweat Park was not called Sweat Park.
Nope.
It was called Bow Park.
That's right.
For body odor. B.O., Sweat Park. Everybody in town was Bow Park. Bow Park.
Yep.
So, I mean, you know, those are, and I see more things going on downtown. You know, so there's more. But back in the day, the town, boy, they had all these little businesses. They had a tailor shop. You know, I mean, the post office was where Town Pizza is today. I don't really remember, but there was a Star Lunch, what was behind it, which was another little bar room or whatever.
That was the same thing as the Stein, wasn't it?
Well, the Star Lunch I thought was on this side.
I think it was the same thing.
It was actually, and I don't remember this. Henry the Barber used to tell me there was a bowling alley underneath.
Still there.
The main block where the gavel is and all that. Henry used to set pins. Now Henry passed away at like 90. He started his barber shop in 1952. So there were two barbershops. I know I'm going on about old Wrentham, but
keep going. I'm going to jump right in a minute now.
There were two barbershops in town. You went to Henry's. So Cataldo's was Morse's Hardware back in the day. Right beside Morse's was a little tiny space. That was Henry's original barbershop before he moved across the street. So if you wanted to talk sports, you went to Henry.
Yes, you did.
Henry was the guy. He would tell you stories. He told me a story maybe 5 times about hanging around in Wrentham Center on a Saturday night. This big fancy car pulls into Davis's. Guy gets out, comes out, and he's bought a pack of cigarettes. Henry said, I knew who it was right away. No, Ted Williams. Ted Williams stopped and talked to Henry like 4 or 5 Saturday nights in a row.
Yeah.
You know, but if you wanted to talk hunting and fishing, you went upstairs to Les King. Les King had the hunting and fishing barber shop. At the same time, there were 3 doctors in town who all came to your house. But they all had offices. Dr. Brooks had one right across from Les King. He had his house on Franklin Street. Dr. Raymond, his White Barn Farm, that was Dr. Raymond. And Dr. Roderick was right in the center of town. So you had 3 doctors. I mean, it was a neat little community to grow up in. And everybody, I mentioned earlier, the village, 1880, you knew everybody. You knew everybody.
Yep, you did.
So, but that's enough for now. I could go on forever.
I got to throw this fact in, talking about Henry's barbershop.
Yeah.
I was the guy in 7th grade getting a haircut at Henry's barbershop. We were watching TV.
Yeah.
The TV was always, I don't ever remember the TV not
TV was
being
always
on,
up in the corner.
And there was a guy sitting down waiting to be next after my haircut when Walter Cronkite came on and announced President Kennedy died. I was in Henry's chair. He was going around my left ear, and I was afraid to say anything, but I held my breath. I'm thinking, please, Henry, don't cut my ear off. And he didn't. And it must have been 40 years later when he was an elderly gentleman, I was talking to him, and I said, Henry, do you remember who was sitting in your barber's chair? You were, and when are you going to get a haircut? Well, Henry, you haven't seen me for a while.
Yeah.
But anyway, you don't know. This is only about 3 years old. I had short hair for like 40 years.
Going back to the famous people, Rocky Marciano used to come through Wrentham all the time. I tended, not tended bar, I pumped gas in high school at the L&B Chevrolet place as a shell dealer. And Rocky used to stop like every Saturday night. He'd come through and he knew me by name. Hey, Smitty, fill it up or whatnot. And first day I met him, I didn't know it was Rocky Marciano. But it'd be like at least once a month he'd come through and fill up his tank.
In front of Cooney's Drugstore, again, right around the time I was in the 7th grade, a van pulled up, an Econo Line van pulled up in that little circle in front of Cooney's.
It was a
Remember that?
circle. Yep.
Window rolls down, and a celebrity musician asked me how to get to the Lake Pearl Ballroom. Okay, you know who it was?
Guy Lombardo.
No. No. Mitch Ryder.
Mitch Ryder and the
Mitch Ryder.
Detroit Wheels.
Mitch Ryder and the Detroit Wheels.
Sure.
I gave him directions to the King Philip. If I wasn't there, he'd still be driving around trying to find it.
And that brings up a good point. I mean, King Philip and the Lake Pearl Beach and all that, you want to talk about going concerns.
Oh, yeah.
You know, Saturdays and Sundays at Lake Pearl Park, there are 1,500 to 2,000 people. And on Lake Archer was Jones's Beach. There was another public beach on Lake Archer. Then the ballroom had all the big name bands and this and that. They had huge company outings, and you know, almost tons of kids worked there, either up in the ballroom or, you know, I lifeguarded there for 4 or 5 years. But it was a real social center. If you mentioned Lake Pearl or King Philip Ballroom around New England, people knew exactly Wrentham, Mass.
They did.
Wrentham, Mass. Because back in the big band swing area, they had them all. Guy Lombardo, they had every one of them.
They've got all those. They've got all those pictures in that box underneath the window next to Liz's chair.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I looked at it one day. She hasn't loaned it to us yet to copy everything, but she saw there's some stuff in there. I don't know if you'd want it. So I walked over. I opened up the box, and there was a picture upside down. I picked it up, turned it over. It was Guy Lombardo and all 3 of the Enegrin kids getting their picture taken with Guy Lombardo. Is that the kind of thing you might like? Yeah, it would be. So we're going to work on getting a hold of that picture.
Put in perspective, so I lifeguarded there in 1961 and was very happy. My hourly wage was 88 cents an hour.
Oh, perfect.
3 years, we got up to $1. But it was relevant. You know, a vanilla Coke at Davis's was a nickel. A burger was 45 cents. You could go to Burger Chef in North Attleboro and get burgers for a dime. So it's all relevant.
Regional pharmacy, if you had a 1935 dime, you could get a frap.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Bill Rice was the recreation director in town. He was one of the greatest athletes in town and probably one of the nicest people you're ever going to meet. All right, and he's got a personality and a half, and everybody knows him, and he handles things very well.
What you pay him to say that?
A lot of drinks back in the day. No.
I've had the good fortune of being able to pal around with him sometimes.
I'm going to say something about Bill Rice also. Another good thing. My 50th high school reunion was a few years ago, maybe 4 now or something like that. I heard through the grapevine that Bill Rice used to do a really good tour of the new King Philip High School, which none of us went to, all right? So I called up Bill, hey, will you do it? He's, yeah, I'll do one more. Okay. So he gave maybe 35, 40 of my classmates, including me, because I never had a tour of the school. You took, your school tour was fantastic, Bill.
Thank you.
I was enthralled by what you were telling me about my own high school and my own town. You took them around everywhere. You had jokes left and right. You were making fun of yourself because you don't know anything about computers, but you bullshitted your way, pardon my language, all the way through his career. It was priceless. And I have told a few other classes what a good job you did. Have you done any more since then or not?
I've done 2 since. I've done 15 altogether.
Wow.
I can fool a lot of people.
There you go, see?
You know, the best thing, a little sideline on it, so we go down the math wing and I name the 6 math teachers that taught in the math wing when we went to school. And people go, how do you remember that? I go, I didn't say to them, I said, because I look at the yearbook the night before. You know, I mean, come on. I mean, that's how, and there's only one frame of reference, and I enjoyed doing it, you know. It was, you know, the school was great. It was great to me. My wife and I were a class couple in 1965. My kids went there. I worked there. I always thought in recreation in the school, you know, I never thought that they would name anything after me. I always thought you got hired to do a job, and you do the job, and you do for them what you think should be done. And I'd like to say that's what I did. Then years after that, I've finally gotten around to people say, you know, Bill, maybe you did a little more, you know, than people expected. But the night I retired, they had a little get-together at Eagle Brook Saloon, and I was shocked. I mean, I cried. Steve Langley got up from the Board of Selectmen. They said, we unanimously voted the other night that we're going to name this after you. And I was like, wow. I mean, funny thing now is, and I'll tell just one quick story about this place. As you know, I cut the grass here. So about 7 years ago, the high school had to play a varsity game over here instead of the school, and they were playing Oliver Ames, and I was mowing and I was coming in. This real old timer from OA. Somebody said, "How'd you know he's from OA?" Well, he had an OA hat on. I mean, that's how I knew he was from OA. No. So he stopped me and he says, hey, how do you like this mower? Now, mechanically, I know nothing about a mower. I know how to turn it on and drive it. I said, well, it's really good. You know, it does this, does that. Boom, boom, boom. I said, why do you ask? He says, well, I oversee a park in Easton. I said, do you oversee Frothingham Park? Wow. And there's a beautiful baseball, football field that's been there since like the 30s. I go, yeah. I says, well, I don't want to talk to you. Just like that. And the guy goes, what do you mean? I says, a bad experience. So when I was a junior in high school, I tore up my knee playing football at Frothingham Park. And the funny thing is, it's Oliver Ames. So my grandmother was a third cousin of Oliver Ames. My middle name is Ames. So, but I tell people I don't like Oliver Ames. So the story goes on, and the guy finally says, he says, you know, this is a beautiful place. I've never been here. He says, who the heck is this Rice guy? So I always get into, should I tell him or not? But he was a nice old guy. And I said, yeah, I said, that's me. He says, he used some expletives about, you got to cut your own blankety blank grass? I go, yeah. And he's, not only that, you're still alive? I go, yeah, I am, you know? So it was Buddy Worcester, who was a great athlete in Easton in the 50s, was the guy. But that's happened to me maybe 5 or 6 times. Jeez. You know, so.
The only place you saw Bill's name before they named this was in ladies' rooms walls.
I knew that was coming. You know, you couldn't have a better town, a better place. Right. You know, people have to realize how important the history is, but how important the here and now is, because it all connects together. You know, what your people, your committee with the 350 is doing is unbelievable. You're covering all the bases. You're doing a great job. I mean, the plus is there's more media now and more social awareness as far as that's concerned. But you just couldn't find a better place to be in with an incredible history. You know, and people should take the time and go back to, you know, King Philip's wartime and the early settlers and some of these older houses, because there's a tremendous amount of history in Wrentham and just a great place to be.
You could not have had more fun growing up in Wrentham than I did. Yeah. And you know, in the late 60s, early 70s, we did everything. It was fun. It was a blast. Everybody that tells stories about that time, you guys are all too young to remember this, they're all true. Okay. Yeah. And as the chairman of the Wrentham Historical Commission, and most people think I've been around forever. Has your family been in Wrentham forever? I says, no, I'm the only one in my family that actually is a Wrentham native. My parents, like I said earlier, came from Iowa. However, I have direct ancestors buried in the cemetery in Wrentham, England. Wow. So they came through Wrentham, England, and as we found out later on Ancestry.com, helped settle Watertown. So damn it, I says, couldn't have come over to Wrentham and helped that, you know, so I could brag about that. But no. But anyway, it was a wonderful town. It still is. I think it's more picturesque. There's something special about the people. There's something special about the way it developed. Yep. Mm-hmm. You know, and just last thing, you know, I can't recommend more to anybody to learn about Wrentham and enjoy it.
Greg just took the words, I'm sorry, Greg, didn't mean to cut you off, took the words out of my mouth. The people in Wrentham, we grew up, it didn't matter what age you were. You could hang around with the next guy. You know, everybody just got along so well, and the older kids would take you under their wing and teach you this and teach you that. It was just a tremendous town to live in. That's tremendous.
Because Al and I are jealous, maybe you could name the time capsule after Al and I. Then something gets named after us.
Exactly.
Isn't that a good idea?
We'll think about that. We're thinking about putting you in the time capsule.